So if you've done any research or are knowledgeable or interested in snakes or reptiles in general, then you probably know that outside of the venomous types of snakes, there are basically three different kinds that you talk about or think about. And that's boas, pythons, and colubrids, right? Well, it turns out that it's a little bit more complicated than that. There's actually quite a few different types of species that honestly don't really belong in any of those categories. And today I'm going to talk about 5 different kinds that are loosely put into those categories, but honestly kind of belong in their own separate or individual little things. Joining me today is our juvenile male Dumerals boa that we picked up like a week before we got Lily and James back, but we don't handle him nearly as much as we should, so we're going to take this opportunity to handle him because the actual species that I have that represents one of the ones that we're going to talk about today doesn't like me, doesn't like being handled, and will absolutely strike and bite me on camera. And since that's not something that I ever want to do intentionally, I'm not going to put her on camera, at least holding her. So we're going to have him in his place, but we're still going to talk about her extensively going into that. So 5 species that are boas and pythons, but not exactly boas and pythons. So before we get started, really quick, I just want to say this. This is another one of the 5 different lists or top 5 lists that I did pretty much pirate from another very amazing, influential, and informative reptile YouTuber, which is Wiccan's Wicked Reptiles. Absolutely go check out his page, although let's be honest, if you're watching this video or following me, you probably already do. But go check his stuff out. But this is literally the type of video that some of you have actually asked me to make. So we're going to continue to do those, not exclusively, not only, and not, hopefully not the same topics that he also covers on his page. So let's get right into this. So the first one is a type of python, but not really. And that's the sunbeam snakes. So at this point, if you've looked on anything on Instagram or on social media at all, when you're looking at rainbow snakes, obviously not the rainbow boas, when you just see like a really pretty snake, one of the ones that comes up is the sunbeam snake. These guys are really cool. They're a snake from Southeast Asia. They're part of their own genus, so it's the only one in that genus, and I think it's pronounced Xenopeltis, and hopefully I didn't just butcher that. I'm going to do my best to remember to put up the actual Latin names for them up here as we talk about this. But these guys are really cool, interesting species of snakes. So they're highly iridescent, very similar to the rainbow boas, the Bolin's pythons, like the IMG boas and things like that have very high iridescence for a darker snake. They're about, 3.5 to 4-ish feet long, females still being bigger than the males, like a lot of the pythons. They do feed somewhat by using constriction, so by using those things, they are kind of able to be grouped into the python category. They're a very fossorial snake, so if you haven't heard me use that word before, fossorial basically means under or in the ground. So very fossorial species, when you think of, are like the sand boas, the ones that kind of are like the little graboids that hang out under the ground and then pop up and grab their stuff. These guys are also very fossorial, and their anatomy shows that. They have a kind of a blunted shovel spade looking snout. And they have very large rostral scales or ridges, which are not ridges scales, which are their nose scales. They're very large, which are all adaptations used for burrowing and digging their own burrows. What are you doing, little one? He's in shed, so hopefully he tolerates me for this. These guys are really cool snakes, and they're really interesting to keep in captivity. The only problem is I don't think anyone has successfully bred them in captivity, at least in the United States. Or if they are, not with any sort of regularity or very successful with it. They're usually brought in as imports, which most of the time I am not a fan of. They have a very high mortality rate because, as I said, they're imports. The importation process is a little not great for really any species, as well as they like it cool, they like it dark, they like it humid, and they really don't like a lot of handling, period, even once they do get established. So really cool species snake, one that personally I think isn't quite there yet when it comes to actually keeping in captivity. So moving right along, we have another one that's actually very similar to the sunbeam snake, and that is the Mexican burrowing python. So this is the one that essentially claims the title as the New World's only python species. So they're the constrictor species that lays eggs instead of is either vivarious or ovoviviparous like boas. So like this one here, the constrictors, the tree boas, all of that jazz, they do lay eggs. But they're again part of their own specific genus, which Loxosemus, sorry, I'm going to glance down because I have a notebook here in front of me because there's a lot of information. It's hard for me to keep it all exactly straight, so I apologize if I'm looking down a lot. Very similar to the sunbeam snakes. They're pretty iridescent, very fossorial. They're a little bit larger than the sunbeam snakes, sometimes getting about to 5 feet long, but that kind of dark brown, olive green to black snake with a really light, creamy, yellow-white underbelly. Again, they have that kind of shovel-shaped snout. They have very small eyes. They're a little bit closer to the top of their head, which is good for another adaptation for that. They have very small clutches, so a lot of boas and pythons, they have large litters and clutches of eggs. These kind of have smaller ones, 2 to 4, almost similar to like a Louisiana pine snake or a type of colubrid that has very large eggs, and these guys also have pretty big eggs as well. So really cool snake. You see them in captivity come up on like importers lists every once in a while, and I would assume that the care is very similar to that of the sunbeam snake. Keep them dark, keep them cool, don't mess with them a whole lot. And because they're imports, probably need some parasite and gut loading stuff going on with that too. So moving on from there, we have another species that I did talk about in another previous video about different types of boas, and that is the Tracky Boas or eyelash boas. So these guys are really cool. They're a true dwarf species, especially when compared to the other boa type snakes. So, like these guys, and even then they're kind of like a more of a clinger-on when compared to like the true boas, like the emerald tree boas, Amazon tree boas, imperator's, and things like that. So these guys, they're found in the New World, mostly on like locality islands in from the Gulf of Mexico, Central America area down, not Gulf of America, so like the Caribbean, there we go, that sounds better, the Caribbean, Central America down into South America, where there are a lot of the islands off the coast, where a lot of these smaller dwarf species that don't need to achieve the size of the larger mainland counterparts because the prey there doesn't get big either. It's, one goes with the other, right? These guys are really cool. Like I said, they're dwarf boas, so they all stay very small. Not many people work with them in the United States, which is a little disappointing. They have a bunch of really cool adaptations. So they can actually change color like a chameleon, that they have their pigment cells can expand and contract and move. These guys are a little bit different. They have light absorbing skin cells that are around a specific melanophore that can expand and contract, to where at night they're kind of like a silvery white color, and then during the day they're a darker kind of brownish tan color, which they reason to think that it's that the darker colors absorb light, cooler colors lose heat and light slower, so the paler snake at night lets them retain their absorbed heat that they take in during the day, and the darker colors for them to take it in faster. So dark during the day, light at night. These guys are a weird species, the Tracky Boas, as originally they think, because when you look at their basic biology, they look very similar to like the Candoya, so like the Viper Boas and Solomon Island ground boas and things like that. But actually, when they look more on a bit of a genetic DNA, cellular level, they have found that they're actually their closest relatives outside of their kind of genus and family is a group of snakes called pipe snakes, that most of which, in fact, are actually from the old world in Southeast Asia. They're a colubrid type of snake, and they're a really interesting species, but it's just kind of really weird that somehow those two are more closely related than others. With that being said, really cool species of snake. And another really quick here at the end, because I already talked about in the previous video, I just think it's a really cool adaptation. These guys have a really cool defense mechanism called auto-hemorrhaging. So similarly to the Texas horn lizards and all the other horn lizards like that, they will shoot blood out of their eyes as a defense mechanism, which is the process called auto-hemorrhaging. These ones can't actually project it off of them and shoot it into a predator's face or mouth, but they will essentially, like so on him, on his eyes, nose, mouth, and out of his cloaca, will essentially pool and collect blood, and it is, I imagine, a fairly well and effective deterrent, considering they still have it after however knows long when they developed it in the first place. So, moving right along, there's another species of pygmy or dwarf boa that's similar to the Tracky Boas but are in a different family, and that's called the Bohemian, or yeah, because from Bahamas, so Bohemian pygmy boa. These guys are really cool. They also can change color just like the Tracky Boas can. They're very small, only a foot to 2 feet long. They're also the vivarious, so they have the live birth just like boas do. They are kind of an interesting little snake. They're kind of like a yellow orange. They're kind of like a brownish colored snake, kind of mottled color like you would see in a lot of species of snake that's used for adaptation, for hiding in amongst trees and under the underbrush, kind of that mottled brownish pattern. But they have kind of a bright yellowy orange tipped tail. And they think it might have to do something with caudal luring, similar to like how green tree pythons, they have an interesting shaped tail that they use and wriggle around like a grub. They think that possibly they use that as a type of lure to bring in a bird or an animal, and they will pick that up. They will, however, eat a lot of lizards. They will eat a lot of fish. They have a bunch of different names. They're not only found on the islands of the Bahamas, they're also found in a lot of other different islands around the Caribbean, different subspecies, localities, whatever may have you. But they're a really cool snake, and supposedly, like, the people who see them and interact with them on the islands, they say that they're kind of like a little miniature ball python, because when you ever find them and disturb them, they will roll up into a tight ball, kind of like a ball python. So, the last one that I'm going to talk about is one that we've all probably actually heard of, and then once I describe it a little bit, you'll go, yeah, that is kind of weird. And that is the genus Aspedites, which is made of 2 different species, the Woma python and the black-headed python. So if you saw the desert reptile room tour that we did, you saw that we have a female black-headed python, and she hates me. Which is okay, that's fine, we're working on that, kind of. So that's why we have him out here, which is a different type of boa, which is not exactly like the true boa or whatever you may have you. But these guys are from, there's only the 2 species in the genus, they're found from Australia. These guys make no reason as to why they're actually pythons when you think about a lot of things that make them pythons. They're more active hunters. They will hang out in burrows during the day, but they will more actively go out and seek out prey versus kind of the more ambush hunters like most boa species are. They don't have the pits that sense heat like along their ridge like a lot of the pythons do. They do have heat pits that they found, kind of primitive acting heat pits, which are found on their rostral scales, which are up here on their nose, but it's not found kind of around their mouth. So just the placement of it looks really weird, and honestly you can barely see it unless you're kind of looking at it with a macro lens or under a microscope or something like that. They are pretty big, heavy reptile and lizard and snake eaters, both the womas and the blackheads. Pythons predominantly are mammalian eaters. They mostly use their sense of smell and their heat looking for specifically mammalian or warm-blooded animals. These guys, they will go out and specifically look for, a lot of the time, snakes and reptiles, probably because that's what there is a lot in Australia. Their ranges are broken into a couple. I think there's 2 different subspecies in both the womas and the blackheads, but the womas are the smaller species. They are predominantly found in the more arid, drier parts, closer to kind of like the central part of Australia. And then the blackheads also can be found kind of in the outback too, but they're a little bit more tropical, a little bit more humid. The black-headed pythons have this really weird adaptation where their head and neck up to a little bit going down their spine is that literal complete black color, which they think, similar to how the eyelash and Tracky Boas, they use the color changing ability when they're dark during the day to absorb the UVB light and warm up faster. The solid jet black color they think they use to just poke out just that during the day to that way hopefully avoid predators like Australian hawks, to avoid them and just have that little bit exposed, and even that small amount will be able to, use their thermoregulation to absorb that UVB light and heat much faster and then go back under and stay protected. They're a really cool species. They're really interesting to work with. They're very fast, they're very reactive, and just everything kind of about them is a little bit different than just a regular python that you normally think of. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. It's hard for me to get too into detail with a lot of the different species. Number one, because I've never kept them. So a lot of it, I'm just straight doing a lot of research right before we do this video, which is like, about 30 to 40 minutes of research per right in the ear. 30 to 40 minutes of research per individual species of snake right before that. So I apologize if I get a little tongue-tied and a little bit rushed about that. But if you have any other questions or some really good knowledge, I absolutely know that every once in a while on these videos, someone will throw in like, hey, just so you know, this little example, this really cool tidbit of information, which is really cool because I'm learning too. I'm not an expert, I'm not a biologist. I'm just a weird dude who loves snakes on the internet, and I want to share that passion and knowledge with other people so they can also be weird people on the internet that like snakes. So hopefully you enjoyed this video and you got something out of it. I super appreciate all the views. Please like and subscribe if you can. I have a whole bunch of different playlists, including one here for the different top 5 video playlists. Go check that out. It helps me on the algorithm, helps my click rate, lets YouTube know that I actually exist, and that way I'll be able to continue to make really cool interactive content for all of you. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you're having a great day, and we'll check you next time.